Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the Tribunal. As my colleague rightly mentioned, my name is Jean-Christophe Martel, and I will be presenting the claimant submissions on the merits of the case. Echoing what counsel for respondents said previously, the reason why we are here today is that the parties did not have a crystal ball when they signed the contract on July 1st, 2008, and did not predict at the time the Benzone beryllium or the canal accident. Risk is the central issue of this case, and I will demonstrate today how risk was shared between the parties in such a way that the claimant is entitled to the purchase price and the damages. I will make three submissions to this effect. First, on the issue of conformity, the respondent bore the risk of new regulations. Secondly, on the issue of delivery, the pump's late delivery was a fundamental breach. And finally, on the issues of impediment and mitigation, the claimant is entitled to the damages. Turning to my first submission, members of the Tribunal, the respondent bore the risk of new regulations because the parties had agreed in their contract that the pumps sold would comply with regulations in force in Oceania at the time of delivery, and not at the time of the contract.
Did it say that in the contract?
Not word by word, Mr. Arbitrator. Not exactly. That's the reason why we are here today. In fact, Mr. Arbitrator, our submission is that there are two reasons, both under Article 35(1) of the CISG, why the respondent bore that risk according to a correct interpretation of the contract. And the first reason, Mr. Chair, to answer your question, is that Clause 2 of the contract, which can be found at page 12 of the record, Claims Exhibit 3, requires compliance with all relevant regulations for use in Oceania. And considering that the purpose of the contract, the irrigation project, was so fundamental for the parties that they even specified it in Clause 1 of their contract, the correct interpretation of relevant regulations for use meant future regulations. Madam
Counsel, you put much emphasis, as I take from your argumentation, on the word relevant, but shouldn't one put more emphasis on the use of the word are, in present tense? How can that allude to future regulations?
Yes, Madam Arbitrator. At the time the contract was signed, our client knew, and the respondent knew as well, that not all the pumps were manufactured at the time. Not all the pumps sold in this contract were in existence. And therefore, giving it meaning that the use of the present tense in that case meant a statement of fact would be illogical, because the pumps were not existent. Now,
Who wrote this clause?
in fact, Mr. Arbitrator, it is our client who insisted on the clause, and the clause was written by the respondent in our case. The second reason, members of the Tribunal, why the respondent bore the risk of new regulations is that since the passing of risk, delivery, under Article 36(1), is the relevant moment for assessing the conformity of the goods, regulations enforced at the passing of risk should therefore be the relevant standard of conformity. And that logic, members of the Tribunal, was adopted by the German Supreme Court in 2005 in the frozen pork case, where a seller of pork was considered in breach of its conformity obligations because it had not complied with regulations adopted after the contract in the country of use.
This is a CISG case?
That was, Madam Arbitrator, a CISG case. The seller was from Belgium and the buyer was from Germany. And the way that the German Supreme Court reasoned, members of the Tribunal, is that in that